Good evening and welcome. I'm Roy Blitzer, and our show is Ask Dr. Business. Happy New Year. Happy 2019. The purpose of our show is to provide information and insight that will help make your work life more satisfying and even fun. We're starting a new series, Jobs That Have the Long Commute. And we're very lucky this evening to have a delightful guest who actually travels from her home in Millbrae to Pleasanton. Her name is Audrey Long. She's the head of marketing at a company called Purigen. I want to remind you that you can call in with any questions. The phone number is 650-856-1491. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here.
I wanted you to please begin by telling our viewers a little bit about your background. Where did you study? Where were your first job opportunities? And what kind of experience you had with commutes even before this long one?
So I, for my sins, was brought up in the United Kingdom.
That's the charming accent.
I did my first degree in biochemistry a long time ago in Cardiff, which is in Wales, South Wales, in the United Kingdom. And that first job that you asked me about was actually working as a biochemist at the lab bench at a company called GlaxoSmithKline. So that was my very first position, but as a scientist. It was quite obvious to me reasonably quickly that after 2 years of pipetting all kinds of things.
And not seeing too many people from
and
your
not
lab.
seeing too many people, apart from the ones in the lab, that I really wasn't destined to stay at the bench. But I love technology. I love the whole science arena and the way that biotechnology has moved over the years. It started off in what was then standard PCR and developed onto what today is now known as DNA sequencing. So that whole arena, and I was essentially a protein biochemist to begin with, but I realized that I still wanted to keep the technology part, so I made a rather strange move, some might say, into the world of the commercial world in science, and I became a sales representative. That was my very, very first, what I would call real job in commercial, as opposed to being a scientist at the bench. And that's when my whole world with commuting started.
Tell our viewers a little bit what you did. They'll be amazed. They wouldn't even flinch at the Millbrae to Pleasanton anymore.
So for those of you who do not know the United Kingdom is around about 600 miles from top to bottom, and around about, let me think, probably around about 400 miles at the widest point from South Wales all the way across to Cambridge. So I lived at one end. I lived in Wales, one end, and my sales territory was all the way across into Oxford, which is just about near London. So that commute used to take me about 3.5 hours in one direction, and I would obviously have sales territory in between. But every week I would do that commute at least once a week, maybe twice, and sometimes I'd stay overnight and then make my way back.
So you did that like in 2 days, perhaps, right?
Sometimes I do it in one day, but I try to be
Oh,
efficient.
Audrey, I'm very impressed. No wonder this doesn't seem like a big deal.
But, you know, in those days, the traffic was not as bad as it is today.
Okay, we'll talk about that in California in a second.
Yes.
So you have a long history of commuting.
Yes.
Then you went from the sales arena to direct marketing. That's what happened next, or?
Yes, in fact, I moved away from the direct sales mode and went into what I would call more of a product management, product marketing mode. And at that point, I was trying very hard to utilize the technology and skills I'd learned from a sales commercial arena and put it back into what was then an engineering company. I went to work for a company in the UK called the Automation Partnership, and their arena was actually making robotics, big robotics. So these are not benchtop instruments. These are instruments.
They aren't cleaning your house. These things are big.
These are huge, yes. I mean,
A commute involved with this job?
oh yes, this one was a much longer commute.
You're my ideal guest for session number one. How long was that?
Well, it depended on where the robot was needed. So in this particular case, I was assessing technologies, and for the most part, because I was then working in genomics, this is industrial genomics, at that point, most of the technologies were amazingly on the west coast of America, here in Silicon Valley. So I spent a lot of my time between Boston, Chicago, and the west coast here in Silicon
But still
Valley.
based in the UK.
But still based in Cambridge, UK.
Wow.
And I would spend a week, and what I learned quickly when you're doing this kind of commute where you have multiple time zones, you do not start your commute and your week in Boston or the West Coast without thinking about the time zone change.
Exactly right.
So obviously between the West Coast and the East Coast, there's a 3-hour time zone difference. So if you're going in the wrong direction every day, if you're in the wrong direction, you're getting up an hour earlier, which makes it much more difficult. So I learned quickly not to do the wrong direction.
Well, you must have patience of a saint or a great back. How is your back?
My back's fine.
Do you travel with one of those supports in your car?
I don't travel with a support, but what I do make a point of doing is when I'm traveling, especially either on a long drive or it's a long flight, I make very sure that I have some kind of neck rest. If I don't have the fortune of having the ability to lie down to sleep
Right.
on an aeroplane, then I always make sure I have neck support. That's the most vulnerable piece to make sure you have a headache and back injuries.
Well, let me see if I can get some of our viewers to have a question. You are a seasoned commuter. I'm Roy Blitzer. This is Ask Dr. Business, and I'm here with Audrey Long, our first guest in the series of jobs that have long commutes. Please dial in with your questions. The phone number is 650-856-1491. Now, tell me about your commute from Millbrae to Pleasanton. I didn't tell my viewers, but I think a long commute is over an hour. I think everyone would agree. How long does it actually take you?
So typically it does take just over an hour. Depending on the traffic, it can be between an hour and 5 minutes, or it can be, unfortunately, an hour and a half, depending on the traffic. I must admit, the day of the commute makes a difference.
Oh, then give us your little secret.
Thursdays.
It's like the airlines. They say you should book your tickets on a Tuesday.
That's right, that's right. But Thursdays is the worst day of all.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't. So if I go on 880 to meet my colleague in Berkeley, I should not do it on a Thursday?
Thursday is a difficult day.
Thank you.
Right. And the reason is because a lot of the big trucks that are moving goods and services, but mainly goods, across the United States, they come down this whole corridor, which is essentially the Pleasanton corridor, and they come down that route. So all of the trucks are either going this way or this way. They're basically going up or down that corridor on a Thursday because everybody wants to go home on Friday.
Makes sense.
So Thursdays is the most difficult commute day of all.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and I'm glad that. Now, talk about routes. Do you take a different route each day? For example, would you take I guess you have to go over the San Mateo Bridge from where you are.
That's correct, yes. So there are
That
two.
may be standard.
That's probably, there's another route. You could go over the other bridge, I forget the name of it.
The Dumbarton?
The Dumbarton Bridge. You can
to
go
go
that
south?
route, but you
Yeah.
have to go a long way south.
Right.
So the San Mateo Bridge is probably the best route for me to go. There are times, I still have to go over the bridge, but there are times when the traffic that you encounter can be so difficult that you have to find an alternative surface road route.
Now, that shouldn't give publicity, but do you have Waze or Google Maps? What is your secret there? Give us a little tip.
I do not use Waze. Some people do. I tend to use a map that has traffic enhancement on it, so it tells me when the traffic is bad and where it's bad.
Is that on your computer or in your car?
It's actually part of my car. So,
right, very nice.
I made an investment because I knew that a lot of these commuting distances and some of the routes were difficult. So I made the decision, for a number of reasons, to buy a Tesla. Now, there are some particular advantages with a Tesla.
But I did know they had their own map system. That's very impressive.
They have a very unique map system, yes.
Do you vary it if they tell you to go somewhere else? Or you do like we do? We debate the lady in the GPS whether she's giving us the right directions or not.
In this particular case, in other systems I've used, I have done that, but with the Tesla system, I haven't found I've had to do that.
Good for you.
So it's actually pretty good. But there are advantages for the Tesla. The first one, of course, you don't need to put gasoline into it. So there's no gas to put in there. It's a totally electric car. So that saves a little bit in terms of financing for the actual commute.
Oh, especially if you have a long commute. Did you realize?
Right.
I didn't even think about this when I was asking about some of the, but I guess that for people that don't have those cars that are cost and electric efficient, it was very expensive.
It can get very expensive, yes.
Will some companies pay for the commute? What do you think?
Typically not.
I don't think so. That's a
No,
good
typically
point.
not. But the other advantage of the Tesla is it has a particular function whereby you can request it, and it will nudge you a little bit, but it will basically have an automatic driving mode where it literally drives for you. Now, you do have to keep your hands on the steering wheel or make sure you pay attention. And if you don't sort of move your hands along the steering wheel often enough, it will beep at you and say, you are banned from using this automatic driving route until you stop.
Now, what about an emergency stop? Will it stop for you like it does on TV?
It will.
Amazing. And the things on the side, the little beepers, that if you're too close?
Yes, it will tell you if there's some, if you're on automatic mode, it will move for you.
Whoa.
So it will tell you if there's anything
Don't
there.
quote me. It might be almost worth the investment. Let me see if we can get someone to call for this delightful tip information on commuting. 650-856-1491. I'm here with Audrey Long, the head of marketing at a company called Purigen, who is driving from her home in Millbrae to Pleasanton. You did mention the advantage of having an efficient car with services and what I would call amenities that make it almost worthwhile. So you have a different route each time. You have a special day. Tell us, or our viewers, what you do in the car when you're commuting.
Well, the commute time, because it is reasonably long, there are things that I like to do since I have nothing else to do per se. I do have Audible, which is an auditory book reading version, so you hear things. I have actually learned in the past various languages in the car, so I've tried to do that too. That's not always very useful though, because you're trying to concentrate and it's going further ahead than you can take in.
One of our friends said that you can speed up your Audible books.
You can.
That must be very difficult in a car, I would imagine.
I have not done that, but yes, you can do it, but I have not done that.
I didn't ask this in our prep time, but do you listen to novels or business-related books?
Both.
Oh, really?
Yes, both.
I'm impressed.
Yes.
I would probably use that time to get caught up in my recreational reading. So you listen to audibles, which is good.
Yes.
And communicating, you can't.
No, there's no typing. I'm very fastidious about not touching a cell phone whilst you're driving. I think it's dangerous. I'm lucky in the fact that if somebody does call me, on my steering wheel, I have the ability to answer a call. I can make a call by literally talking to the talking to the actual computer, the onboard computer.
Well, the Prius has the pickup, but it does not have the talk.
Right.
You need to sort of either do it secretly or try to figure out a way how to dial, but usually you can pick up.
Yes.
Okay,
well,
so
you can pick up, but I can, in this particular car, I can actually ask it to make a call for me.
Now tell our viewers some of the information and tips you gave me about using the car phone. Like,
well,
only one person rather than more than one, which I think was good.
So one of the things I find is sometimes it's useful to be able to have some business communication because you are captive. However, I do not advise you have multiple people on the other end of the phone, just because it's very difficult when you're in a car. Now, the Tesla does happen to have a particularly good phone system. Not all cars do, and I have had cars where they don't have a clear system. So if you have multiple people on the other end of the line, it's very difficult for them to hear you, especially if you're going in and out of cell phone signal. So my rule is that you have one person that you talk to if you're going to have a business communication.
Good.
Secondly, the other person typically should be stationary. They should not also be in a car.
So no two phones.
I have had it happen. It's not ideal because now you've got two people with varying cell signal. Then it becomes
I also
difficult.
think even when you're doing in an office, having two cell phones communicate, I think is a risk. Someone needs to be at a.
Yeah. So I typically have one person on the other end. It should not be a complex conversation. So it could be maybe organizing when you're going to meet or when something's going to be done. But it should not be a complex discussion where you have slides that someone's trying to explain something. That's way too complicated.
Right.
You're driving, after all. You need to keep your eyes focused on the road, even if you do have something where the car is actually trying to help you drive. But you still need to pay attention.
So one person.
Yes.
Simple topics.
Yes.
I like the fact that. How about I say? What about in a traffic jam? Could you make a call more detailed when you were stationary and stuck somewhere, or just as a policy you don't? I think it's probably a good policy.
I don't like to, it's just my own personal view, but I don't like to encourage people or set a precedent, because if you do it once, people think you can do it again.
That's very true.
So I try very hard not to set a precedent. There are emergencies, of course. Sometimes you have to do something. But as a rule, I don't try to encourage complex conversations, even if I am stationary and stuck in a car.
Now, would you normally tell someone you were in a car?
Yes.
Okay, and that doesn't seem to negate what they would say or cause a different reaction?
Sometimes they won't give me all the information just because they know it's difficult to concentrate. But as I said, if you keep the complex calls out of the car and wait till you get to the office, that's much better.
Well, your advice is wonderful. Let me see if I can solicit some input. I want my audience to benefit from this delightful information sharing. Please, the number here is 650-856-1491. I'm here with Audrey Long, the head of marketing for Purigen Corporation in Pleasanton, California. She is a perfect guest for our first session in Jobs with a Long Commute, because she's driving from her home in Millbrae. Talk a little bit about temperament and the kind of person that you think would be more suited to a long commute versus someone who might not.
Well, I do believe that not everybody is suited to have a commute that's a long-distance commute. Some people just don't have the patience for it. Others just have a hard time, not just concentrating for long periods of time, but also have difficulty with dealing with a difficult problem whilst they're driving. For example, you've got somebody who's driving erratically, or there are multiple large vehicles moving around you. It can be quite scary, especially as I mentioned on the Thursday. You literally have probably, for every car, there is a giant semi-truck.
Right.
8 or 10 giant semi-trucks per car. So it's a huge ratio shift. So having to concentrate and get scared with those things can be very difficult.
We have a question. If you can hold on a moment, I'll be able to answer that for you.
How does your long commute affect the rest of your day, your non-business hours?
The question is, and I'll repeat it, how does your long commute impact the rest of your day?
So
I'm glad that came up. I think that's a good
Yes.
one.
Well, first of all, you have to be very organized at home. I tend to, I like to cook my own food. I'm not
So you'd come home from this commute and cook?
No, that's my point.
Oh, good.
So what I tend to do is I make all my food, and I tend to use things like a crock pot, a slow cooker, or I have things that are, I would say, almost cooked, or sometimes they're already cooked, so all I have to do is heat them up. You're coming home in the evening, anywhere between 7 and 7:30 in the evening. The last thing you want to do is start preparing a meal.
I'm glad you said that. I agree.
Yes.
Now, would you typically, to answer, have your question elaborate, would you come home and relaxed, go read the, I mean, you don't, I hope not go to another meeting or anything after that.
No. Typically, I try very hard to switch off. So you switch off, at least I do, I switch off when I get back. Eating to me is a pleasure, so I'm lucky that I enjoy my food. So my food is now already hot because it's been stuck in a slow
Right.
cooker all day. That's great. I'll have my dinner, and the next thing I will do is find something to either read or watch.
Well, it's interesting because it just occurred to me, and I'm glad this question came. What about social functions? I will confide in you that if I was on the road for an hour and 10 minutes and my wife came home and said, we're going to dinner or we're going to a movie, I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Do you try to plan your social activities around this commute or not?
I do. I will say, though, I try very hard, and I think people who have a long commute, people need to think very carefully about how that impacts not just the person who's doing the commute, but the rest of the family.
Good for you.
And for me, I find that I take the time to spend at least 2 days a week either working at home, or I cut short my day so that I have a couple of evenings a week at least where I come home a little bit early.
Well, it's interesting. We haven't gotten there quite yet, but we have another question. I cannot read the... what? We have Stephen on the call. Yes, can I help you?
Hello, Stephen. Oh, I'm sorry. Honestly, hello, Roy.
Stephen, we know you're there.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me right now? Hello, Roy.
Maybe my tech person will just let me know what the question is, and I'll answer. I'll have Audrey answer Stephen's question.
Hello, Roy. Can you hear me?
This is the disadvantage of live TV, but we'll work it.
Okay.
While we're waiting for Stephen's question, what occurred to me is that one of the qualities one needs to be a commuter like this is infinite patience. And you seem amazingly even-tempered and not easily frazzled. I think that would be the thing I would look for before someone wanted to take a long commute.
What's the worst commute you've ever had?
The questions come through. What is the worst commute you've ever had? And tell our viewers about it. Thank you.
The worst commute. Let me think.
Or the worst commute day, we can elaborate that.
I think the worst commute I've ever had is where I actually had 2 offices. I had one here in the Bay Area, and I worked for a company that had another office in San Diego.
Wow.
So every week I would commute between the Bay Area and San Diego. I would actually stay overnight in San Diego.
Right.
And then I'd come back. So I worked 3 days in the Bay Area one week and 2 days in San Diego the next. And then the next week I'd work 2 days in the Bay Area that week and 3 days in San Diego. That
So
was
you
quite
not
a
only had
challenge
a plane commute, but then you
Right.
had to drive.
once I got there.
Wow.
Yes, so that was probably the worst of all my commutes, just because it involved a lot of planning. So I had to pack a suitcase, make sure I had everything available for a different weather pattern, and then make sure when I got back that I was able to get up the next day to go to the other office. So that
Well,
was probably
that's
the
a great-
worst commute I ever had.
Now, what advice would you give someone if they came to you and asked you if they should take a job with a long commute?
First of all, they have to make sure that the position they're going to is something they really want to do.
Oh, they will learn something different and enhance their career. I agree.
That's right, that's correct. Or that something that is so unique they couldn't learn it any other way.
Ah, that's a nice, you're right.
Right, so that's the first thing. Secondly, they have to understand with a long commute that they have to change the way that they arrange their personal life. Now that may be not just, as I say, whether you're going to cook when you get home. I mean, maybe if you're not somebody who likes to cook, but somebody else in your family is, but you need to be able to explain to that other person that you're not going to come home for dinner at the same time every day, and you can't
Nor
guarantee.
might you be cheery every day coming home.
You may want to have some quiet time when you get back.
Yes, right.
So that's another thing. I think the last thing, and probably the most important, is that you have some kind of release, some kind of outlet when you get back home.
Good for you.
So that you can relax. So for me, and I started this not too long ago actually, but I decided I needed to have some kind of relaxation which wasn't just reading or watching the television when I got back home, but actually doing something. So I actually joined for my sins a dance studio.
Oh, wonderful.
So a couple of times a week, not all the time, but most weeks, at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, I will get back and they have a dance class that starts around about 7:30.
So you make that in time.
So I get there in time, and for about an hour and a half, we have a dance class.
Fantastic. Now, one of the things that came in our prep that I wanted our audience to hear about is that scheduling meetings and when you're after the commute. Talk a little bit about that. I thought that was great advice.
Right, so the first thing is most people like to get to their meeting on time. Anyone who is late obviously feels bad because everybody else has been waiting for them, so it's embarrassing. So the first thing is you never set a meeting time where you think everybody's going to be scrambling to get there.
Especially the commuter in you, right?
Right, and a lot of people where I work also commute. So the intent is to have everybody in a relaxed mode when they get to the meeting so they're not frazzled. So I typically don't have meetings any earlier than 9:30.
Perfect advice.
That's usually my first meeting of the day.
Well, speaking of 9:30, believe it or not, Audrey, our time is up, and I wanted to thank you so much for your wonderful participation.
Thank you for
I
having
want to
me.
thank my viewers and wish them again a Happy New Year and my crew. And we did very well without the benefit of the audio, so thank you for your patience. We'll be on the air again in February. And I'm toying with trying to convince a commuter from Vacaville who drives from Vacaville to do downtown Mountain View. So stay tuned and best of good luck. Thank you very much. And that's the end of our show.